I want you and I to talk about the business side of things, as you are, after all.
I'm glad to hear that, because there's a lot more technical discussions that are going on here than I can probably engage in. So
humility is a good quality in a future-oriented leader of a company. Let's start with, obviously Samsung is a global titan, a giant in the electronics, consumer products industry, among others. Where does AI fit in your vision? And you made some specific kind of commitments about Internet of Things being enabled by 2020 in all your devices. That's obviously related to the AI push. But can you give us a sense at the high level, the CEO level, where does it fit in?
Yeah, no, I think it first starts, Vijay, with a perspective. I've been in the consumer electronics, IT, telecom, and entertainment industry for over nearly 35 years, I guess it is. And the interesting thing about that, we've used the term convergence.
Oh, yes.
Most of those 35 years.
I remember writing numerous stories about the coming convergence. And
I'm happy to say I think it's actually here, and it's coming. And it's not just because of technology. In fact, it's being driven more so from consumers who are expecting their devices to more seamlessly work together.
Is that what's different this time?
I think so. I think, and there's an enablement for that to occur. So with that as a backdrop, that I think it's coming. We're clearly seeing a movement away from discrete products with discrete uses to more seamless solutions, and that's driving our vision and view. And that is one where, as a company that markets and sells over 500 million connected devices a year, it's obviously in our interest to make those more seamlessly connected for consumers, especially that they want those devices.
So that's the consumer benefit, right? You're starting the journey with the end in mind, as it were.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. But help us understand, again, from the point of view of a senior executive who has to allocate resources. You have to make some tough choices. Your R&D guys will always be excited about stuff, and I know that, what is it, $14 billion you spent on R&D at least a couple of years ago, probably more by now. What's the special sauce that AI brings to you? What problem does it solve for you, or what is it that it enables that you couldn't have done without thoughtful application of AI into your products?
And the way we think about it, taking that example that I just given and go a layer below, we don't think it's AI in of itself. Right? It is the cloud, it is connected car, it is 5G, right? It's all of these components with AI that are going to create, I think, an experience and an opportunity that doesn't exist today. AI, and we've invested in all of those key platforms or enablers.
You've got a connected car product? I think
we have.
Some people may be surprised to hear about that.
Well, in the past 18 months, we've made about $10 billion worth of investments in cloud and AI in the connected car, and Harman is a leader in the connected car space.
I see.
So our partnership and enablement of bringing that together is pretty significant. So we think that 5G is going to enable a lot more things, including the connected car, and all of that is driven by, we think, AI as a key device. Samsung has made a commitment not only to bring these 500 million devices together, but all of our investments in smart home and smart things, right, is the largest platform open platform of IoT-enabled devices. The top 40 brands, about 400 devices. So we're connecting those along with our 500 million devices, and we're doing that with a single cloud, a single app, and Bixby as the AI-powered solution that is enabling us to navigate.
That's your voice assistant, is it?
That is our voice assistant.
Okay.
And it's our way of addressing this market and addressing the fact that these things are pretty powerful devices.
Sure.
I tend to believe that many people use about a third of the power in their automobile in terms of its features and capabilities, similarly in their PC, similarly in their phone. And it's not that they don't want to, it's more and more complex. There's layers and layers behind this. How many swipes do I have to do? Well, your voice, AI-powered, can do that far greater than me doing this with my device. And so we view our play into the AI space and the voice assistant space as enabling you to navigate your device, first this device, and then all the other devices in our family that we're putting Bixby into.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you made an acquisition, was it Vive?
Viv, yes.
Viv, sorry. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that fits in with Bixby and some of the other things you're doing?
Sure. So we started Bixby and that work obviously years ago. We launched it last year with the S8. And just around that time, or just shortly before that, we acquired Viv Labs, many of the members who were a part of the Siri launch. And what we're excited about, what they bring to the table, not only a great deal of experience in this space, but also the ability to allow us to integrate it into third-party apps. Right? And many of our devices, whether they're the phones or whether they're the televisions, are enabled by a lot of apps. And so bringing that voice capability of Bixby through third-party development is really where there's, I think, going to be some uncharted territory that'll provide greater enrichment for consumers.
You've talked a little bit about how your approach to AI and related technologies is changing the consumer experience, how it's changing how you think about products. How is it changing your business model?
In quite a few ways. And I could talk a little more on some other consumer launches that are impacted by that. But in the business domain, we look at it from marketing and customer service as two big areas that we're focusing on. And when I think about our mobile business, we target consumers in a number of different ways. We segment our market in traditional ways, and historically we'd segment the mobile market in a dozen different segments, right? And you would target them. Well, now we're micro-targeting. And we have 80 different targets and segments that we look at, and AI is enabling that. So we're able to get a richness. I can now know whether you are upgrade eligible, and I'm going to send you a specific CRM message and an offer, which is different than the customer who maybe just converted over from another operating system, and I have to handhold that process at a much different level.
Right.
Or we just launched the S9. Well, the primary target is the customers 2 years ago. Now, I can tell them what's unique about this product, and knowing what they've used in their S6, I'm able to target that message. So micro-targeting is a big part of that. In our service space, chatbots and others, right? We get millions and millions of calls, and everybody knows the cost of a call. And frankly, most of today's consumers, especially my kids' age and others, the last thing they want to do is get on a phone and talk to anybody, right? But self-enable them or using chatbots or chats and other capabilities, we're now handling more and more consumers that way, greater satisfaction, lower cost, and I can quickly define whether I need to move them to a higher level of service requirement just based on the Q&A that's going on in that process.
So that's very interesting. So it's affecting how you even conduct your business.
Yeah.
One question related to bots. I spent a few years in China covering business for us, and the tech companies, like WeChat and so on. China was actually ahead of the U.S. in use of bots in customer service, and people are much more used to do you find as a global company, other markets are ahead of the U.S. in some of the implementation of these kinds of things?
I don't know that I can answer that. I think that we're moving pretty quickly in that, and maybe some started at different places. I think there's also historical legacy approach. If you've got embedded assets, it's harder to move to something new.
Newer markets can leapfrog, right?
Yeah, and it's often harder to disrupt oneself, right? And internally.
Absolutely.
So I think, but for us, we're seeing that. We're seeing not only the customer enhancement, the customer satisfaction improvement as a result of it, but also the cost driver. We implemented an app a couple of years ago, Samsung Plus on the phone, and we were getting 30, 40 million downloads on it, and we were just learning that people don't want to have that one-on-one conversation. I don't want to wait on hold. I don't want to do this and get. But I want to get in and out, and in fact, I'm going to get introduced to more information because I'm doing it under my terms. And I think that that's where the digital space presents a great opportunity.
Now, you mentioned disrupting yourself. And the notion of disruptive innovation is obviously very popular, often abused as a term, but nevertheless, it's well observed that large, established, successful companies like yours find it hard to embrace disruptive innovation because it threatens existing lines of business, existing ways of doing things. How do you think about innovation in-house at your own company and in North America where you are? What are you doing to encourage that kind of disruptive thinking so that you're able to at least capitalize on it and protect it from the usual forces? What Clay Christensen, the Harvard professor who coined the term disruptive innovation, told us on the innovation stage of The Economist, he said it releases antibodies. And whether it's my quarterly sales target or my bonus or existing product lines are threatened and their antibodies within a company come and kill disruptive ideas. What are you doing? What can you do about it?
Yeah, I think I think it's important to understand Samsung as a culture, Samsung as its DNA. Disruption is front and center in that. It's a company really that embraces speed, never satisfied, frankly, healthy paranoia. All of those are cultural dynamics that exist within the DNA of an insatiable hunger to continue to grow, all of these things. And in our industry, an industry where the leaders 5 years ago, frankly, many of them are in the graveyard. It's a healthy position to be in. In fact, most of the successes we've had over the last decade have been when we've been able to go in and disrupt industries.
Give an example.
Look at the television industry. 10 years ago, we had a 12, 13 share of that. There was another leader had 35 share of that. We went in and embraced the shift from analog to digital, from tube to flat, from male to female-centric purchase, designed around that, and brought that to market. And fast forward, the market position is the inverse now. Look at what's going on in categories like appliances, where it may not be technology innovation, a disruption, but it is speed and decision-making and partnership and others. So to me, disruption can occur in many forms and many facets. We think about it a lot in technology, but I think it can take a place. Now I find it's actually easier to go in to disrupt other things than it is to disrupt yourself, and I think there's a human nature element that comes into play there.
Now, we talked about your very large spending on R&D. You've got a lot of in-house IP, proprietary technologies, great scientists. But at the same time, the world of innovation has moved from the traditional corporate labs of yesterday, the famous Xerox PARCs or AT&T Bell Labs model, to much more open, collaborative, user-generated models of innovation. What are you doing to embrace open innovation? I understand you have open platforms like Smart Things, but could you give us a sense of the tension between, you can't throw everything open and just sing kumbaya and give away all your IP, but how do you strike the balance as a chief executive?
Yeah, I think balance is the right point. I think where you have fertile ground, right, and a recognition that you need to create new things. 5G is a good example of that, where there's so much excitement about it, yet we have to build out a lot more use cases, right? Well, some of that's going to come from big corporations. A lot of it's going to come from the innovators and the disruptors and the ideators. And so I think that's an example of that. So we have an open innovation lab in Mountain View that's doing a lot of work right now on 5G use cases. And how do we think about that in very non-traditional ways? So that's an example. Smart Things, clearly, is an example where that is an open platform. And we're inviting all the leaders to come on board.
Is that an IoT platform?
That's the IoT platform on that. And we think that is a real good example of it, because the IoT space is getting a great deal of attention now, and it's getting a lot of momentum, and you're seeing a lot of exciting things around that. Interestingly, though, many of those are, again, discrete use cases, right? I can see what's going on the camera here with a specific app, but I might have 4 or 5 apps that are doing different things. That doesn't feel as smart as it could be. So with what we did with Smart Things, and they're going to create a single app, a single cloud with Bixby, now that can be an app that can tie all of those other apps together and bring those together in some interesting ways. So that's how we're trying to take a little friction out of that process in an open way.
Now, you mentioned 5G. Obviously, South Korea has made it a national priority to leap ahead in that area, as has Japan as well. There's a lot of support. being a South Korean company, can you give us your perspective? You have a special sort of insight based on your corporate partnerships and so on. How do you see 5G unfolding? And how is it different in different markets, in the key markets?
Yeah, I think it, to me, it's quite exciting. Everybody talked about this as being 21, 22, 23, and yet as it started to unfold, it's moved up and up and up. And yeah, there's a little bit of PR noise that goes on in any new technology play, but we're excited about it. We're going to be launching. We announced the first 5G in Sacramento with Verizon later this year, and that's 5G around a fixed broadband solution.
Right.
And we think that it will probably be sometime in 2019 and late or early 2020. You'll start seeing devices out there. You're seeing the networks getting deployed. So it's progressing, and that's a U.S. Point of view of that. Clearly, there is a bit of a race, a global race that's going on, and there's a lot of dynamics on the global front. You guys probably talked a bit about that. I know you have a real global background, so I think that's going to evolve. What'll be different, I think, is really the spectrum utilities and spectrum uses that might vary in particular markets, whereas the U.S. might have multiple spectrums. Globally, might be centered more around something they'll call 3.5 gigahertz, and so that may influence when and the speed at which others come to market. But we're excited about the promise about this, 100 times faster. Think about smart city. I think you had that on your agenda,
one of
right?
those panels, yep.
That's something that we've talked about for quite some time. But the cost and capabilities haven't yet been there to do that. 5G makes that really possible in compelling ways, to put little sensors on poles to be able to see car accidents and have real time, to have autonomous cars. Those things that we've seen with and partnering with Harman on to be able to bring that alive, I think is quite compelling.
There was a vigorous debate today about the role of government and policy in 5G. Obviously, we've talked about some countries like Korea have a national policy. The Trump administration has floated the idea of national 5G infrastructure. Other people thought this is the kind of thing, not only 5G, but AI, that are bottom-up, that should be led by companies and really not much of a role for a federal roadmap. Where do you fall out on that view?
Well, I think historically, technology and major technology developments are the fastest level of innovation and progress generally occurs from corporations and industry, and so I think that lends itself best for this. Obviously, there is a broader set of challenges and dynamics as we are now dealing with security and concerns and associated with that. So it gets a little more complex. I think what it really is about is let's get going, right? And let's get this deployed. And we think that the industry can do that quickest.
Okay, well, that's very clear.
Hi, I'm Neha. I'm from Commencement. Tim, as you rightly said, I mean, it's easier to go disrupt somebody else than disrupt yourself. So that's kind of a area we kind of work in as well, where how do corporates disrupt themselves when they're looking at in open innovation as well to collaborate with other startups as well? And why can't corporates disrupt themselves inside or breed innovation inside with their own employees? Is it the talent? Sometimes it is. Like in services, it's mostly the talent that won't come up with disruptive ideas. Is it the talent? Is it the ideas? Or it's just the culture of the corporate which doesn't allow it?
Yeah, I think it may, I think it's all of the above in many ways, and maybe that's not a good answer because there's not a silver bullet. But I think the reality of it is, a chunk of it is that corporate culture, though, and what type of industry are you living in? What type of market position do you currently have, right? Those that are on top generally have the toughest time making that transformation. I think some of the things that have helped our company, things like the Asian financial crisis, right, which took the company and the country to its knees, right? That still is fresh in people's mind, and it drives that healthy paranoia that I mentioned earlier that says we have to continue to innovate or you won't see the train coming. So I think it starts within culture, but I still, when you do that and you look in the mirror, it's a little harder to say I must change. And I think recognizing that, I think, is the first step of it, and then realizing that, somebody described this to me in a different context, but I'll apply it to AI. I think, AI, I think, is going to become a lot like energy, right? It's going to be everywhere. It's how do we use it? How do we find the right uses for it? How do you make sure we're doing it effectively? I'm sure there's a lot of discussions about job creation and job erosion, and my sense there'll be both. Not a sense, there will be both. But I think it is one that is going to permeate us. But again, I don't think it's a singular thing, AI. It's going to be tied to, because it's an enabler of lots of intelligence and lots of new experiences. And that's the way we think about it. And we tie it to all of those other enablers and try to create then a strategy that is going to drive our business and drive value for consumers and drive value for us.
So just following up on that, and probably adding on that.
Just briefly, in the interest of time.
Yeah, so if you say breathing internally, innovation internally, would risk and reward also be a challenge? Because you can't create a risk reward for an employee inside like anybody, an external startup would have.
Sure. Yeah. The question of incentives. How do you provide incentives, I guess?
I think you have to create an environment that stimulates that level of risk and reward. And our experience on it is try not to boil the ocean first. Get a couple wins, get something in, and then let's move our chips in.
The way I would answer the question, there are multiple challenges to corporations, especially successful ones, with profitable lines, doing open innovation or collaborative innovation. Among them, a NIMBY syndrome, or not NIMBY, but not invented here, syndrome amongst the existing engineers, tend to look down on outside ideas. Companies I've talked with point out that even ideas and collaborations that are promising, the lawyers will say, oh no, you corrupted the IP working with outsiders. And so the cultural barriers, procedural barriers, it's not that easy when you have, whereas a startup that's dedicated only to one idea or to open collaboration has more hungers than an existing company with salaried employees. So I think this has been well studied in a way. Just in closing, we just have a couple of minutes. Is there any final question from anyone on the floor, just with a couple of minutes that we have left? Then let me ask you, you wanted to return back to the consumer markets. You said you had is there a great example that you can give us that, if we wait a few years, you're going to be able to do something that's AI enabled, that's going to delight and consumers and really change our lives in a positive way? What do you have up your sleeve that we don't know about yet in, let's say, 5 to 10 years that we can look forward to?
Of course, we'll open all that up for you here. No, I'll give you...
It's just between us.
There's a few friends. I'll give you a few examples of what we actually showcased, and we announced at CES. We just launched an 85-inch QLED television that has upscaling capability to 8K. It is not 8K content.
Right.
Well, we're using AI to learn how to better upscale that content, right? So there's an example of it, real and tangible. In this S9, there's probably 5 different examples of AI, from being able to do something fun and interesting like an emoji and taking 100 different facial points and doing that, to more significant or even greater things around battery management and how do I get more life out of the device. So there's examples there. I mentioned Harman. We just launched DriveLine, which is an open, scalable AI platform that is really taking the benefits of instrumentation and infotainment and bringing it alive. And we showed, all right, I'm in my car. I drive in to get gas. We do that several times a week. And how many times do I look and say, do I need milk? Right? All right, well, Bixby, open up my refrigerator in the car. Right? And I got a big dash there, and now I can see that I need milk, maybe I need a six-pack, maybe I need something else. Right. And so there's practical benefits associated with that, and these are just starting, and some of them are here, some of them are right around the corner. Translation, right? I can go in and look at the Chinese menu and actually figure out what is on there, as opposed to some restaurants that might have a picture of it. And we now have translation capability that's AI and AR enabled. So it's happening, and it's happening in many different ways right now, and I think it's only the beginning.
Fantastic. I think that's an inspirational note to finish on, and on time as well.